All right, welcome everyone. Today we're excited to speak with Dan Olsen, a leading expert in lean product development and author of the Lean Product Playbook. Dan's a driving force behind the monthly Lean Product and Lean UX Meetup, which has over 12,500 members and growing. He also shares his insights with over 21,000 followers on his YouTube channel and has nearly 60,000 followers on LinkedIn. He's worked with a wide range of businesses, from startups to large public companies like Facebook, Microsoft, and Box.com. His expertise in product management, product leadership is built on a diverse background, including leadership roles at Intuit and Friendster. His unique blend of education and engineering and business, combined with his study of lean manufacturing principles, has shaped his approach to product development. And today we're going to explore some of his insights from the Lean Product Playbook and how they can benefit product managers, product leaders, and entrepreneurs. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chuck. Great to be here.
Let's start with the book. Can you explain what inspired you to write the Lean Product Playbook?
Yeah, I wrote the Lean Product Playbook, kind of emerged from my consulting and speaking, basically. So I had been in product management for a while. I started at Intuit, which is a great place to learn product management. And then I had been consulting for a while, and I got into speaking, basically, and sharing best practices. And so at that point, I'd been speaking for several years, had several talks on various topics related to product management. And I wanted to write a book. And actually, the Wiley reached out to me. They saw a talk that I gave at Google and said, "Hey, have you thought about writing a book?" So it was a good timing that they reached out to me. And writing the book was really a good chance to kind of document the best practices that I had learned in my career up to that point. And actually, the cool thing about it was I actually had a chance to sit down and do some deep thinking and create some new frameworks, put some stuff together. Some earlier versions of some of the ideas I had were in some of my talks. You were just talking about SlideShare. Back in the day, that's where I'd post all my slides. And so you can see the earlier versions. But when I was able to put the book, do the book, that's when actually the main framework of the product market fit pyramid finally kind of came together, and I was able to create it. And I wanted to create a comprehensive guide. Like there really weren't that many books. Product management was a relatively new career. There weren't that many books out there. Also, Lean Startup had recently come out. It was very popular, and I saw a lot of overlap between Lean Startup and product management. So, and I had studied lean manufacturing. So for all those reasons, I was like, all right, I want to write a book to share best practices that hopefully help other people and other product teams, apply best practices in product management.
So the framework that you're mentioning there that you brought together and kind of crystallized in the book, can you give a quick overview?
Sure.
Can you give that elevator pitch just to kind of so we can dive into it deeper? Like get us orientated to it.
You got it. Yeah, it's called the product market fit pyramid. It's really the central framework. And product market fit is a term that became popular with the lean startup movement, but actually was coined by Mark Andreessen back in the day. In 2007, Mark Andreessen, who created the Netscape Navigator, the first browser, is now a famous venture capitalist. He wrote a blog post about it, but it wasn't really well defined. And my background's in engineering, and I had been fortunate as a consultant to see a lot of different companies try to achieve product market fit. Some succeed and some fail. So that put me in a good position to kind of create an abstracted model to say, okay, what does it take? What are the things it takes to achieve product market fit? And so the pyramid has 5 layers. Like the reason it's a pyramid is each layer builds on the layers beneath it. And there are 5 layers. The bottom 2 layers are the market part of product market fit. And the foundation of the pyramid, the bottommost layer, is target customer. Everything starts with the customer. Who are we trying to create value for? Whose problems are we trying to solve? And the next layer up from that, which is underserved needs, are for that target customer. What are their needs? What needs do they have? What problems can we solve for them? And more specifically, which ones are underserved, right? And taken together, those 2 are the market. And if you look in a textbook, it'll say a market is a group of people that share a set of common needs. And then the top part of the pyramid has 3 layers. That's the product part of the pyramid. Starting at the bottommost one, I usually have a gap between underserved need and the next one, which is value proposition. Value proposition is, hey, what needs are we going to promise to customers that our product delivers on? And how are we going to meet those needs in a way that's better than the other alternatives and the competition that's out there? It's really like the essence of the special sauce or product strategy of your product. The next layer up is feature set or functionality. That's what actually conveys the benefits. Or this feature is going to help solve this problem for this customer. And that's where the concept of MVP, minimum viable product thinking, comes in. And then the final layer at the top is UX, user experience, right? The customers interact with the user experience to use the features to get the benefits in your value proposition. And product market fit is just, okay, we're going after the bottom 2 layers, the market, we're making these decisions in the product area. How well do those resonate with each other? That's basically the product market fit pyramid.
Yeah. So, when you say product marketing was new when you wrote the book and not well defined, as you describe your pyramid, I'm a marketer.
Yeah,
There's a lot of overlap between marketing and then product leadership, product marketing.
definitely.
Let's start with the target audience, persona, avatar,
Yeah,
whatever it is you're calling it.
yeah,
Right? There's different names for it.
yeah.
Like that's where I started marketing, and that's where your
Yes,
pyramid starts. So
yes.
can
Yeah.
you talk about the importance of target customer? Like one pitfall that I see, if you could speak
Yeah,
to it, is um, they're often too broad. They're not specific enough. Like
definitely.
I like to teach. I like to teach micro, like get as deep into the hyper niche, micro segment
Yes,
as much as you can.
yes.
How do you think about that? How do you coach, inspire product marketers to think about getting the target audience right, the customer?
I agree with you 100%, Chuck. It's that most people are too vague or broad in their definition. And the metaphor that I like to use for this is peeling an onion, right? So, and the example I give often is I was helping a startup and I said, "Who's your target customer?" And they said, "Millennials." And at first it sounded specific. It's a term that sounds specific. They didn't say like young people. They didn't say, it wasn't too vague. But then I realized, well, gosh, there's millions of millennials in the world. Your product can't be for all of them, right? And so I proceeded to ask them some questions and I added two other modifiers to peel the onion. So like that initial naive high level thing that you say, how you describe your target customer, that's like the outer layer of the onion. The trick to any product that's successful, or any marketing campaign that's successful, is they've peeled the onion 2, 3, 4, maybe 7, 8, 9 layers deeper, right? It's like, no, our product isn't just for moms. It's for moms that have kids between this age with this kind of a problem or something, right? It's like you get really specific.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because sometimes it feels weird to entrepreneurs or business people to limit the market. It's like we're building a site just for women. Why would you exclude half the market? Let's make it for everybody, right? And probably the person who best made this point is actually Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1. He makes a very compelling case that many successful companies start with a very niche market, right? Like Facebook started for college kids at Harvard campus. It started there and then it expanded, right? And it's like a wedge strategy. But the point is, another great quote somebody said is, instead of making something that 100,000 people kind of like, make something that 10,000 people just love, right? And I think that's what you got to start with. Another friend of mine calls them super fans. Find your super fans, right? Who is that initial target market? And it can be tough because, narrowing it means committing. And you might, well, if we just broaden it, maybe we'll kind of have better odds, but it's not true, right? What I would rather do is, okay, if you're not sure, pick 3 very specific ones and experiment with all 3. You don't want to experiment with too many, right? So the key way to peel the onion, the technique, is market segmentation. And I feel like, honestly, Chuck, it's a bit of a lost science or art. When I worked at Intuit had very strong marketing muscles coming from consumer packaged goods background, where you've got to convince people why they should buy this bleach versus that bleach. It's the same chemical in the bottle, right? So you better know who your target customer is and what your unique value proposition is, right? So we were really good at that. And real quick, the market segmentation techniques, the most common ones are, the one that most people jump to right away is demographic, age, gender, income, geography, things like that. For B2C. For B2B, there's firmographics. How big is the company? What industry it is in? What's the revenues? How many people, right? And people jump to that because it's easy to kind of get your head around. But when you're doing the segmentation, one thing to really keep in mind is causality versus correlation, right? And demographics almost always ends up being more correlated than causal, but it's fine to use it, and it's great to start with. The next one is psychographic. So if demographic is who you are, psychographic is like what's important to you, what are your values, what are your attitudes, right? And that can be basically orthogonal, independent of demographic. Like how much you care about the environment would be a psychographic factor, perhaps. And there could be old people that care, old people that don't care, young people that care, young people that don't care. And then the third is behavioral. So if psychographic is kind of what you believe, behavioral is what are you doing? You're actually observing behavior, right? And sometimes what people say and what they do is different. If I ask a group of people how often they go to the gym, they might say once a week. But if I actually observe their behavior, it might be more like once a month, right? And so behavioral, you might have, for example, power users, high frequency users, lightweight users, things like that. And then the final category is needs based. And this is where you get to the true causality of like, why are people falling into this market segment, right? It's because they share these needs. Even though they have 3 different job titles, they all have this need for this one workflow. And therefore that's the common element, right? And people ask me, what should you should use all of them. It's like triangulation, peeling the onion, use them all, slice and dice. Hopefully you can eventually get to some needs-based behavioral psychographic that are more powerful than just the demographic. And then you mentioned, kind of persona or avatar, how we bring that to life a little bit for the team is you need to do your market segmentation, which is kind of like it's faceless. There's not a person there per se. But then if you want to kind of make that a little more engageable with the team, you would create a persona and say, okay, here's the busy mom. Here's what her problem, her problem space statement is, And for that, sometimes people, their personas are too busy. They have too much stuff. They have extraneous information. We want them to be evidence-based. We want to have like a nice, simple handle title, the busy mom. And then you want to have like the pain point, right? Of like a quote from them. Like that's the other thing is a lot of times when people talk about customer needs or customer pain points, they parse it into company speak. It's like, no, just use the words a customer would use. Like, I have trouble keeping up to date on my prescriptions. Great. That's what we're going to say. And the way you invoke it is when we're in a meeting, say you and I are debating some feature or some product strategy or some marketing tagline. Instead of it turning, what happens if you're not clear on the target customer, people devolve into subconsciously advocating for themselves. Like, I think this tagline is better than that tagline. I think this feature is better than that line. Instead, what you do if we're disagreeing is we take a step back and go, what would the busy mom prefer? Would she prefer this feature or that feature? Would she prefer that tagline or this tagline? So that's how we invoke it and use it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a ton of overlap there between product roadmap and product management and marketing, and running kind of the same problem. You mentioned a tagline. Sometimes you don't know which tagline. Well, let's go back and think about what avatar are we putting this tagline in front of? Who's going to be using this feature? What is their problem set? So I think you're right. It's a lost art, a lost craft of building, segmenting target audiences, micro segmenting, building avatars, personas, and really understanding them. Because you're right. I mean, you need to go demographics, psychographics, needs-based behaviors. I mean, you've got to take all these things into account. The better you know your customer, the better you're able to serve them with the product. That's my belief. Okay, product. I'm going to move up the pyramid just a little bit. MVP gets thrown around all the time, right?
Yeah.
Build an MVP. Let's test the MVP.
Yeah.
Let's prototype. Let's. You had a. I really liked your take on MVPs as it relates to why and how it's crucial in product development and testing and getting to market. Because if I understand right, like MVP cannot be an excuse for poor quality or poor execution of the roadmap. So talk through that. Like what perspective do you teach for MVP?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first thing is to start off by saying, so MVP stands for minimum viable product. Out of all the terms, like we have, jargon and terminology in the product world and the marketing world, out of all the terms, MVP is probably the one that is the most divisive. And people have strong differences of opinion about what is and isn't an MVP, right? And I like to do this in my workshops and talks. I ask people, I put up a thing. I'm like, who thinks that could be an MVP? And, and I start out with a landing page, and very few people do it. And I developed it after the book. I have this spectrum of increasing kind of fidelity or complexity. And I start with a landing page, and, a small percentage of people raise their hands. And I'm like, well, what about a mock-up, static mock-up? And a few more people put up their hands. And I'm like, what about a interactive prototype that you can click around, but it's not working code? And a few more people put their hands up. Then I'm like, what about some alpha product that is just not for public use yet? And they're like, yeah, then more people put it up. And then I'm like, what about a public beta? And some people put their hands up. Then I'm like, what about a publicly available product that you're selling? At that point, everybody raises their hands, right? So it's like you go from, so it's just funny. And what happens is, there's two very different interpretations in people's minds. And some people take the P in product very literally. And they're like, Dan, a landing page? How can a landing page be an MVP? Don't you know what the P means? It means product. An MVP has to be a product. And that's kind of the hardcore interpretation of MVP. And those people are never going to agree with the people at the other end of the spectrum. They're like, no, landing page can be an MVP. It's like, hey, and their definition of MVP is, hey, it's anything you can learn from. Why you got to be so uptight and rigid? Anything you can learn from or test hypotheses from can be an MVP. And there's two fundamentally different views that they're never going to agree, right? Trying to jam those two views into the same term is not going to work, which is why I propose going up one level and introducing the term MVP tests or MVP experiments. And then I look at the hardcore MVP people and say, if we use the term MVP test to include landing page and prototypes, are you okay with that as long as we reserve MVP for the hardcore, product stuff? I'm like, well, I guess so, right? So that's one way to kind of make it. The other thing is really important, and I have another slide, which is everybody understands that like the first version of a new product that we're going to launch, we have to have an MVP discussion about what's in scope, what's out of scope, things like that. What I personally was more important to me is actually I want to prototype and test it before we do any building or coding, right? That's the riskiest thing you can do. And the way old waterfall software development would work, we used to write some big PRD or MRD, give it to a team of engineers. They'd go into a cave, they'd heads down code for 12 to 18 months. They'd come out of the cave and we'd launch their software and then no one would buy it. That's the riskiest thing you could do, right? So coding something before have a high degree of confidence it's going to create value is where the risk comes in. So what you should do instead is prototype it, right? If it's a website, a web app, a mobile app, prototype it before you do any coding and show it to people and test it with people. And when you do that, it's going to change. Nobody gets it right the first time, right? So that's the first thing is I'm a big believer in using MVP prototypes before you do any building. But the core essence of MVP is regardless of whether it's you're going to code it and build it or you're going to prototype it, it's the discussion of what functionality and features absolutely need to be in scope and which ones can wait. That's what it's all about. And by the way, I use product market fit pyramid. We talk about the product level. All these concepts and tools can be applied at the feature level too. You can have a feature market. Who's this feature for? What's it supposed to do for them, right? Same thing with minimum viable feature, right? You've got to make that decision of what's in scope or out of scope, what can really wait at every product milestone. Frankly, at every sprint. Every sprint, you've got to decide which set of user stories are in scope and are out of scope. So MVP thinking is like a 24/7 thing of what absolutely has to be in scope and what can wait, right? And look, it's super easy. It's super easy to say, yeah, put that in. Say, it feels conservative. It feels less risky to put more stuff in an MVP, right? And I usually put up a roadmap slide where I've phased out functionality across some versions. And what happens is, say you do propose kind of a more lean MVP, what often happens is someone in the company sees that there's some feature, their pet feature that they think is really critical is not in the MVP. And they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're not going to have this feature in there. I think we're going to be embarrassed. We're going to the clients are going to laugh at us. It's going to be horrible. We got to protect the brand. And so that kind of thinking, slippery slope thinking, you add that feature. And then the next stakeholder has their pet feature. Next thing you know, you've got a kitchen sink MVP. It's not minimal anymore, right? So it's really easy to fall into that temptation of, let's just add that one more feature in there, right? But if you do that, you're adding more time, right? It's going to take more time to build it and get it out there. And, I view it as like, yes, we want to get prototypes and test it. And that's kind of like working off the rough edges and polishing it up. You can only go so far. And I would do that pretty much every time. You can only go so far. The next level of getting fidelity and true market testing is a live product. And if you overscope your MVP, it's going to take that much longer to get your live product in the hands of customers and get that feedback. So that's kind of the, and I understand it. It's, usually it's from people, it's from sales, from key stakeholders, or even maybe from some big clients if you're in B2B, insisting that they need this feature or that's horrible if we don't have this feature, right? But, basically it's kind of like the general thinking. It's not very nuanced. It's just like, hey, more features, better chance we're going to hit product market fit, right? That's kind of the basic thinking, which is like kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall. It's like, hey, the more spaghetti we throw, the chance of something's going to stick. And it's just like, that is the least scientific, precise way, expert way of doing product development, right?
Right. No, I think about it in different layers myself. So first, there's table stakes, right? There's certain things that have to happen, even like it's connected to the internet. I'm just making that up but there's
no login, login, security, payment, sure.
Right. Yeah. Then you have, and I don't want to come back to, well, no, let's go there now. After table stakes, how how do you coach, train, help people work through, the brainstorming of different product features? Like how do
Yeah.
you how do you figure out which one? We have a persona. What's your
Yeah.
process for figuring out which
Yeah.
3, 5, 7 product features make up the MVP?
Sure. So it actually, we need to go back a few steps because this brings up one of the most important concepts, which is problem space versus solution space. Most of the discussions you have with your team, stakeholders, sales, and clients are about features or solutions. If you take a step back and think about it, there's a nuance, which is, it's like a nuance, which is, okay, you were asking for feature X. Why are you asking for feature X? And you may not be able to say it. After I do some discovery research, I might finally get to the point of, oh, you want to do that because you have this one workflow for billing that's taking too long and you want it to be faster. Well, that's the problem, is this, you want this one step in the billing process workflow to be faster because it's painful and takes too long right now. That's the problem. You're asking for feature A to solve that problem, but really that's your problem. Now, maybe feature A is the best solution, but more often than not, it's not, right? Because they're starting, it's kind of like ready, fire, aim. It's like you're proposing the solution without really knowing the problem. And that's the thing, is far too often, all of our conversation and proposals and what we're working on is in the solution space. And no one's really getting clear on, well, who's the customer and what's the problem that they have? Did we actually talk to a customer? Did they confirm that they have this problem? What words did they use? And then once you do that, once you realize that, that's one of the biggest things product managers can bring to their team, because developers have to code solutions in solution space. Designers have to create designs in solution space. By the way, we live in solution space. So it's not surprising. That's the default way human beings think. And so this way of trying to understand the flip side of the coin of the solution space, which is the problem, that's a learned kind of mindset and thinking that the product manager built. Once you do that, you can do what I call it. You mentioned brainstorming. I like to brainstorm in the problem space first. Let's brainstorm. Okay, we're trying to help people with their taxes. What are all the different ways we could help people with taxes? Like, what are all the problems we could solve related to taxes? Well, it takes too long. It's complex, yada, 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 right? So you you do what I call exploring the problem space. Then you kind of try to clean it up. You clean it up a little bit. You dedupe it. You organize it. Usually there are benefits that are related by themes. I call these benefit ladders. Just like kind of in marketing, we talk about benefit ladders too. But basically, okay, these are all different ways to save time. All different problems related to saving time. These are all different problems relating to saving you money on your taxes, right? Once you have that clear problem space definition, now the question is, great, we've brainstormed 20, 30 needs that we could address. Which ones represent the biggest opportunity? That's where that term underserved comes in, right? So we've solved the needs part of the second layer of the pyramid. Underserved comes in now, which is, hey, for some of these needs, it's actually not a big deal. It's not as big a deal as some of these other ones. They're okay with how they're getting met today. They're satisfied. And that's where when I had to deal with this prioritizing opportunities or needs, I created this importance versus satisfaction framework, where the importance is on the y-axis, the vertical axis is, hey, for whatever need we're talking about, save time, save money, whatever, how important is it to our target customer? And then on the horizontal axis is satisfaction. How are they getting it? How are they getting that need met today, which is not with our product yet, if it's a new product? However, they're doing it now manually with an accountant, with some other product. How satisfied are they? Basically, how satisfied are they with that? And basically you end up with kind of a simple 2x2 of low importance, bottom two quadrants are low importance. You actually want to avoid those. The real way to create economic value and customer value and capture business value is by delivering higher importance. So a general principle is, the higher importance the need or problem you're solving is to your customer, the more value you're going to create, therefore the more revenue you're going to be able to generate, right? So you want to avoid the bottom two quadrants. In the upper right quadrant, you have high importance, which is good because it's better than low importance, but you have high satisfaction. So yes, it's an important need, but the customers are telling you they've already got a solution that they're pretty happy with, right? That's what I call a competitive market. And that's where you have to be very mindful about how you're going to be better or different. You can't just waltz into a competitive market and expect to take market share or people to switch to you, right? And you hear the phrase, you need to be 10x better. That's specifically the quadrant where you need to be 10x better, right? That's what we call disruptive innovation. And you can apply the importance satisfaction framework to disruptive versus incremental innovation. And then that leaves the last quadrant, the upper left quadrant, high importance, low satisfaction. So people are telling you, yes, it's an important problem. And however I'm getting that met today, I have low satisfaction with that solution. I mean, people are basically telling you there's an opportunity there. And so that's the opportunity quadrant. And those opportunities won't be there forever, but by analyzing the market, because there are other companies and teams trying to address it, but by analyzing the market, you can find those opportunities. And so that's the easiest, the easiest thing to do is if you can find some combination of target market and problem that lives in that upper left quadrant. And by the way, the closer to that upper left corner, the better. I have a way to quantify. You don't have to do it quantitatively, but I have a way to quantify kind of what I call an opportunity score, the better. And so, one thing we didn't talk about is like the high percentage of new products or features that fail, right? People say there's studies that say 80% or more or 90% or more. And the two biggest reasons are you started with a solution. Hey, I think people really want this thing called the Segway or whatever it is. You weren't probably clear on your target market. And then, or the problem that you were solving was not in that upper left quadrant, right? So what I've kind of distilled my main piece of advice, if I have like 5 minutes with a group of entrepreneurs or product people or business people, I'll be like, hey, start with a problem, not a solution, and make sure, do the simple, important, satisfaction 2x2. And if you have a problem in that opportunity quadrant, great. If you don't, go back to the drawing board. Don't go execute on that idea because we can tell it's not going to succeed, right? So that's the best thing you can do. Two biggest things you do to increase the odds of success of your product or feature are those things.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, boy, we're down here at the bottom of the pyramid, which is important to get that foundation
Yes.
right, with target audience and
underserved
in
needs.
the opportunity quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
So I sometimes find that a product or a brand is often in multiple segments, right? They're actually trying to, and they may or may not even have the same importance in their pain points or the problem, the problem to be solved. So we've done a good job so far of like you said, you can quantify it, you can have the 2x2. Now what happens if there's 3 different market segments with different pain? How do I start prioritizing or thinking about which features to work on, which products to build, what to MVP if now I have, like, it gets a little more complicated, I'd imagine.
It does. And so this kind of gets at, it's kind of, I think it's best to go chronologically. So you're trying to do your first idea. Let's say there are 3 different opportunities you found. Let's say we're doing B2B. And there's vertical target. Let's keep it simple. Let's say financial services has this problem, and healthcare has this problem B, and I don't know, some energy company has problem C. You have to decide. So one thing you can do right away is just see which one's closest to the upper left quadrant, right? And when I do the scores, the heat map visualization, you can see if it's bright red, if it's right next to that corner is bright red. If as it gets away, it turns like orange, yellow, green, blue, right? So one would be proximity to that corner. If for some reason, one of those is a really burning need for one of those segments, that would help. There's actually a third dimension to that graph, which is how many people have this problem, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing, right? Now, the real trick is if those are 3 completely apple, orange, and pear needs, that's actually probably not a good situation anyway. Because what I like to do, what you want to do is pick, and this is where I like to refer to Jeffrey Moore's From Inside the Tornado, which is the second book after Crossing the Chasm. A lot of people read Crossing the Chasm, but they didn't read his second book, Inside the Tornado. I highly recommend that one because he basically summarizes Crossing the Chasm and then builds on it. And especially for B2B marketing, B2B product, it's an older book, so a lot of people don't know about it. It's really good. He has this concept of a bowling alley. And the point is really the bowling pins. When you go to the bowling alley, the pins, there's 10 pins. They're set in a triangle. And there's the head pin, and then it goes 1 pin, 2 pin, and it just goes back, right? And what he basically, his metaphor is each of those pins is a market opportunity, which is, again, a target customer with a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, what would make the most sense? Going after the solving this problem in legal first, or solving this problem in health tech, or this, right? And then what you want to do is say, okay, we want to knock that's the head pin. We want to nail this problem. We decided it's the biggest opportunity in legal. Now we have a choice. We can go and say, we solve problem A for these kind of law firms. Do we want to expand and also solve problem B for those law firms? Or do we want to take what we solved for problem A and now say, you know what, let's go solve that for insurance firms. So those are the 2 kind of ways you can take your early success, and which way do you want to knock the next pin down? So it's a matter of analyzing how similar those needs are, how similar those adjacent markets are, right? And kind of stack ranking them, right? Actually I have in my workshops, I have an Excel spreadsheet where I basically, on the rows, I have your problem space on the left, which is like your main, your main benefit ladders with the benefits underneath them. And then on the right, I have market segments, like, and then I just do high, medium, low scoring of how valuable it would be to those segments. And then the point is you just switch around the order of those columns into an order that makes sense. And you're trying to find out, this kind of gets back to MVP thinking is, gosh, we could go for healthcare first, but they actually need us to solve these 3 problems before our product is viable. But in legal, they just need us to solve that 1 problem. So why don't we start in legal, nail that one, and we'll refine it. And then, and then maybe there's a segment, and, it's like, what's the building blocks? Like, what's the right order of bowling pins to knock down? That's how I think about it, basically.
Yeah. So from there, if you understand the opportunity quadrant and you've identified, the best products / features that are going to be MVP, how do I move further up the pyramid? Because you got me all the way to UX, but there were some steps, there were some things above that. Like, what's the thought after that?
There's one thing between, this is the one thing we didn't cover yet, between, say you find some needs in that upper left quadrant. Before we get to features, there's one step, which is value proposition. So say you've identified, gosh, legal people really do want this thing to be easier. Now what you need to do is, we haven't really articulated how we're going to be better than the competition. And so that's what value proposition is, basically. So you take the problem space benefits, and you had mentioned table stakes earlier. This is where I like to apply the Kano model, which is just a categorization. I learned about this in lean manufacturing. It categorizes the needs into one of 3 categories: must-haves, which are basically what you're calling table stakes. Must-have needs, not features per se. Like if we're doing a financial website, it's got to be secure, right? If we're doing a health tech website, it's got to have HIPAA. Like, just these are the true must-haves. A must-have is a term that gets thrown around pretty loosely by big stakeholders and people saying we must have this feature. It's not. There's a very specific definition, which is, if you don't have it, they won't buy your product. If you do have it, they don't go, yay, you have secure transactions, right? It's just, that's the definition of it. The second category is performance, benefit, or features. Frankly, this is where most of the competition happens. Hey, we're 10% faster. We're 10% cheaper. We're 15% higher quality, right? Things you can quantify how your product's better, right? If you think about like microprocessors, chip speed, or cars, miles per gallon, things that you're competing on these things, right? And then the third category is delighters, which are kind of bonus things. Like, not having a delighter doesn't cause a problem, but by having a delighter, it makes people really happy, right? So in the early days of Instagram, filters were a delighter. Like, nobody else had delight. Nobody else had these amazing filters. They're like, whoa, okay, cool, this is great. And then over time, what happened? More and more people, now you have to have filters. So they went from a delighter to a must-have, right? So over time they evolved. But anyway, you basically, organize your benefits, the problem space, into must-have, performance, delighters. You have a column for each of your key competitors, and you have a column for your product. You score how good a job, again, high, medium, low is usually adequate. You score how good a job each of my competitors doing on each of these benefits. And then you take a step back and you look at that competitive landscape and you say, okay, I think we can be the best. Our product strategy is, we're going to be the fastest, or we're going to be the cheapest, or we're going to be the highest quality. You pick which row you plan to dominate, right, across the competition. And that sets that clear vision for what we're going to do. Now, when you go to brainstorm features, you better deliver on whatever your special sauce was going to be. If you're going to be the fastest, okay, now what are all the things we're going to do to make our product faster than the other products? So that's how it all ties together. So it's kind of like a logical march. Who's our target customer? What are their needs? Let's run those needs through importance satisfaction. Let's find a need in the upper left opportunity quadrant. Now let's do a competitive analysis and how are we going to be best at that? And now let's brainstorm feature ideas that are going to back up how we're the best at that. Now let's go prototype the UX. And the final step is, let's go take that and test it with customers, right? And then based on testing, you've kind of done your first pass through the pyramid, which gets into lean product process, where you work from the bottom of the pyramid up. And then there's one more step where you take that prototype that represents all the assumptions and decisions you've made, and you close the loop at the bottom of the pyramid and test it with customers, because you definitely didn't get everything right. You're going to learn that, any of those 5, I forgot to mention, the thing about the pyramid is it's got 5 layers. If any one of those 5 layers is significantly wrong or off, it will preclude you from achieving product market fit. You don't have to be perfect, but if like you're missing a key feature, no product market fit, right? Bad UX, no product market fit. Wrong customer segment, no product market fit, right? And so that's the tough thing. And as you iterate, the further down the assumption that you got wrong or hypothesis you got wrong, the more painful it is, because you got to rebuild the whole pyramid again, right? If it's just like, oh, we missing a key feature, or we just need to improve our UX, that's so easier. But if it's like, no, we thought these people were going to want it, and that's where a pivot comes in. And there's so many pivots out there, right? Like Flickr started out as a game and pivoted into photo sharing, right? So anyway.
Right. Now, and if I think somewhere either read or saw an image that you built that implied, so it could just be my assumption, that your version of MVP needed to go from the bottom to the top of the pyramid. MVP
that's a separate pyramid. Yes, there's a lot of pyramid people. It's funny. This is a separate pyramid that comes from Aaron Walter's book, Designing for Emotion. And so this pyramid is a way of just thinking about or describing a product. At the base of it is functional, like how functional is the product. The next layer up is how reliable is it. The next layer up is how usable is it. And the top layer is how delightful. This is my version of it, right? So it's delight at the top, useful, reliable, functional. One of my clients who didn't want to have to say that all the time, we just called it the DERF pyramid, DURF, the DERF pyramid, basically. And the point is, when we're doing an MVP, you start out with an empty pyramid. And the point is, how much of this pyramid are going to realize with our MVP? And we know it's not going to be the whole pyramid. That would basically be waterfall. We'd take forever to launch it, right? And so what happens is, I use this pyramid to illustrate what a lot of people do. They misuse the MVP idea, and basically they'll launch a product that only fills in some of the functionality. Now, filling in only some of the functionality, that part is actually fine because we don't want to build all the functionality. We don't want to throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall. We want to have a very strong opinion that we think this subset of functionality will be an MVP. But what's going on is the reliability is not filled in, and the usability and delight is not filled in.
Yeah.
And the way that usually goes is, I know we were supposed to fix those bugs, but gosh, we're on a deadline. We said we'd launch it by, July 1st. So we'll fix those later. It's just an MVP. Yeah, I know we didn't get a chance to really work on the UX design as much as we wanted or test it with users. Gosh, we're just so behind schedule. We'll launch it. We'll try to do that later. It's just an MVP. So this phrase of it's just an MVP gets used to cut corners on reliability, usability, delight. And as I like to point out to people, it's like, well, if you were to launch that MVP that was buggy and didn't have good usability and didn't have delight, how do you think it's going to do? It's going to fail, right? Yeah. So a lot of people in the early days of Lean Startup, they try it, they cut corners, they read too much in the minimal thing and say, cool, we're going to launch something shoddy very quickly. And then they say, oh, this doesn't work. This whole Lean thing doesn't work. Let's go back to waterfall. But they didn't follow it right. Yeah. So to your point, a lot of people call it a thin slice or vertical slice. The point is, yes, we want it to be a subset of functionality, but for whatever subset of functionality we are going to test, let's make it be reliable enough. It's not going to be perfect, usable enough and delightful enough to get a true test of what we're doing. So people call it a thin slice, referring to that vertical pyramid slice.
No, I love all the frameworks and pyramids and, I can see where coming from an engineering background, you took something very abstract at the time and you codified it. And now you run the workshops against it and consult against it. So let's go a little off framework, off book for a second. I'm sure. Curious about. Let's use the phrase earlier. Ready, fire,
aim. Yeah.
Right. So let me say I see three phases in MVP. Right. You have a lot. The planning. Right, you have that. You do all the planning and everything, and then and then as you build, like we talked about scope creep and prioritization and stuff, and then you launch, and then you got to get customer feedback. So my question to you is, first, in your day-to-day work, do you find yourself involved in those three phases equally? Are you often helping plan, but then you hear about it later? How do you help product managers, companies, brands? Is it point them in the right direction, help them stay on target, figure out what went wrong? Where is your expertise most not only helpful but most useful?
Yeah. Well, it's across all those. And I would add one more between planning and building. I would say testing, that's the whole point, right? So a lot of times, and I've been doing this for a while. So for the longest time, I was I would be helping out post Series A, post Series B startups that had managed to get some level of success with their first product, but it wasn't the level of success that they wanted. And they were trying to expand or trying to, do new products, right? So that's certainly, so in that sense, it's all the first phases, as well as it incorporates, well, let's get feedback on what people like about it, right? Like for Box, we talked about Box, right? Box was a big success. In 2007, I worked with them. They got some success, like a post Series A level success, but not huge success yet. And I went in there and I was advised, I was in those kind of situations, I'm typically the first formal product person in there. Obviously, the CEO and the team had enough product savvy to get to that level of success. And that's a typical thing for my clients is usually they have some level of success, but they want to go higher. Like it's like, we want to go even better. And they had never run a user test, customer feedback session. Back to your point about after you launch, you need to get feedback. They had never run one. So I'm like, you guys haven't run one? Cool. So I organized a session. And I remember it was a funny setup because people wanted to watch, but I wanted to do it in person. So what we did is we set the person up on a laptop with a projector going to a screen behind them, and everybody else sat over here, like kind of like it's like a viewing area for the screen, but the user had their back turned, so they weren't cognizant of all these people watching it, right? And it was so eye-opening for the CEO. He's like, oh my gosh, like we found if you've never done user testing, you immediately find bugs. You immediately find UX issues, right? Because I call you get calluses or product blindness. You forget, when you're building a product, you're the expert on that product. You forget what a brand new user is going through, right? So it was hilarious. So like out of that first session, we came out with like over 10 items we needed to fix. And then we ran a few more sessions. So that's an example. That's an early stage thing, right? Another company hired me to ideate with them about the problem space. And then actually, usually I partner with the designer and we work on the actual prototypes or mock-ups. And then I'll run the sessions and test them with customers. I mean, if they want to do it, that's fine, but I'll do it. And then I'll get the feedback and we'll parse the feedback and we'll iterate, right? In fact, the case study in the book, so, after describing the lean product process end to end, I describe an end-to-end case study in the book, marketingreport.com. That was me as a consultant working with the designer, doing all those steps that we talked about, right? Now, lately, since the book came out, I've transitioned more into doing a lot of training, right? And the other thing is in the last 5 years, product management has exploded, right? Mark Andreessen, who we quoted earlier, also famously said software is eating the world. So naturally, everyone knew you needed to hire engineers. But like in the last 7, 8 years, I think people realized, and if you want your software to be successful, you need to have product managers, right? And so it's just blown up. And so you have all these people doing the job, but unlike an accountant or a lawyer, there's not some formal education certification process really that's like, and so, basically the best thing you can do, there's a lot of different options these days, way more than when I was coming up, but basically is get instruction from someone who's an expert in it. And what I like to say is it all comes down to who the instructor is. So when I'm teaching the workshop, it's me. I haven't franchised or delegated to anybody. And so I really enjoy that because that's how my work began and grew, was from speaking and what questions did I get from my audience. Oh, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? That's what led to new talks. That's what led to that demystifying MVP talk. That's one of the most recent talks I created. I was getting so many questions about MVP. I'm like, okay, let me put a talk about just that topic. So I do a lot of training in addition to the consulting that I do.
How does someone, I know they can buy the book.
Yeah.
How do they get more information about your workshops, your training, having you come in as a product management leader, as a product leader to help them?
Yeah. Well, my website is my name, Dan-Olsen. So it's Olsen. So DAN-OLSEN.com. And there's links to the book. There's a link to the meetup you briefly mentioned. So again, another thing, I'm a big fan of sharing best practices since that wasn't really available, which is what led me to start that meetup over 10 years ago. So every month I bring in a top speaker. Sometimes I speak, but I usually bring in another top speaker. And then I have a YouTube channel that my talks are on, as well as the people from the meetup. So we have over 20,000 subscribers. There's a link to that from my website. There's some more information about my workshop. My speaking schedule's there too. Like I'm excited that now that COVID's over, there's more in-person conferences going on. So I've been going to different conferences and doing in-person events. And then there's info about my workshops, and there's like a contact form you can fill out. Happy to chat with you. And, each of my workshops is basically bespoke. I've been doing this for so long. I have, thousands of slides. And so we kind of talk about what are your learning objectives. Oh, you want to learn more about MVP? Great. You want to learn more about targeting customers? Great. And we create a custom design workshop for people. So yes, that's what I really enjoy doing.
All right. Well, if you're interested, reach out, dan-olsen.com. And it's been great learning more about your work and what you've put together. And I'm not a product guy by training, but I have put some products out there. So probably should
Yeah.
have studied up on your pyramids beforehand. But we all figure it out, and we can all get better. And it's great that
Yeah.
you're sharing your best practices and what you learned over the years with folks. And I really appreciate you spending some time today and just talking us through some of the nuances.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And as you said, there are a lot of parallels with these things can be used in product marketing as well. So happy to share that. And yeah, it's been great talking to you today, Chuck. Thanks a lot.